Yo, what's going on, guys? So, in today's episode, we actually recorded this episode on June 2nd, the first day of game one of the NBA Finals. So, in this episode, you'll get our Eastern Conference breakdown for all the teams that were eliminated and how the Boston Celtics actually made it to the NBA Finals, and as well as our NBA Finals preview. And we also have Khalil going over the new addition of the Lakers head coach Darvin Ham and how he can actually impact and help the Lakers return to the playoffs, which is what all Khalil wants to happen for them. So appreciate it. Hope you guys enjoy this one. So let's start with the Eastern Conference because I do think the Eastern Conference was a little bit more of a tight split based along the teams from 1 through, I guess, really 7, almost 8, almost if you want to count them, but 1 through 7 in my opinion. So, I mean, 1 through the first seed, the 1 seed versus 8 seed in the first round, you had Miami, I believe, getting 4-1, if I remember, on the Hawks.
Yeah, they beat the
Hawks. So they beat the Hawks in 5. They had Trae Young in purgatory. A lot of people talk about Trae Young. They say he's one of the young great point guards, and I do agree that he's also one of the young great point guards. But this series, you had a team just really focused all in on him and actually was able to neutralize him and slow him down enough to handle business quickly. What do you think for Trae Young and then the Hawks coming into this offseason, getting eliminated in 5 games, but almost really being just a borderline team throughout the season? They struggled early, stayed alive midway through, had their push at the end to get all the way at least to 8. So what do you think for them? Do they think have coming up?
Well, about that Miami series, I think Trae was quoted after like game 3 saying that he hasn't been guarded like that since high school or something like that. So that was crazy. And then they actually closed the Hawks out in game 5 without Jimmy Butler. He didn't play in that game 5, we can remember. So that was kind of disappointing to see Trae go out to a Heat team without their, I guess you could say, best player. But as far as the Hawks, they have the talent, it seems, because they have DeAndre Hunter, they have Bogdan, they have Red Velvet, Kevin Huerter, they got Trae Young, they got John Collins, they got Clint Capella. They traded Cam Reddish. He's with the Knicks now, but he was a player that they had. I just don't know what offensively. I think they have the talent, but just as we know, defensively, if you don't sit down and play defense, you're not going to go anywhere. And with Trae Young individually, the next step in his game, because he's already great. He was named 3rd team All-NBA. We'll get into that later. He's already great, but the biggest question about Trae Young is, will he ever even be able to become a player defensively because of his, him only being, I want to say 5'11", 6 foot, being generous, skinny frame, not really being able to slide his feet laterally, getting, bodied in the playoffs. So it's kind of interesting to see where they go from there as far as if they make any moves this summer to add any like defensive personnel, or if they're just going to stick with the same squad and think that they can make a run, because this same team was in the Eastern Conference Finals a season ago. So them being out of the playoffs before the play-in tournament was kind of surprising. But as far as the Hawks, once they start locking in on defense, I think that would be a player in the East. And I definitely think that them making the Eastern Conference Finals a year ago was an amazing run that I don't think can be duplicated. But I think once they start locking in on D, that they can be a little bit more formidable than they were this past season.
And I mean, I've heard DeAndre Hunter be talked about along the lines like trade talk. So depends on where you're going to find that defense from. I guess it'll have to be from the draft. I mean, just adding players to fit into the system of Trae Young, pick and roll, will be on the ball most of the way. Like at the end of the day, that's likely what's going to have to get for him. But then you had the 4-5 matchup with Toronto Raptors. Very beat up throughout the entire series, but actually end up doing the most damage at the end of that series with hurting Joel Embiid, getting him an orbital fracture to have him out to begin with. And then he also had a thumb injury. So even though they got out of the first round, they made it to the second round against Miami. it wasn't much he could do because, again, we have a generational big man that we have in Joel Embiid, but constant injuries. Again, you have injuries that pop up right then and there, and you have a player in James Harden who didn't show up and not but one game in the second round. And it's just like, for Philly, I feel badly for them because Joel Embiid and the Philadelphia Sixers were playing well without James Harden. They get James Harden for this moment now, and they end up faltering in the same position that they always end up faltering. And so it's like you ended up giving away a guy like Jimmy Butler, who was quoted at the end of that series saying, Tobias Harris over me.
Tobias Harris over me?
And I wouldn't deny that. I mean, that's just, it's silly talk. But at the end of the day, for the Sixers, I feel badly for them. I know for their fans, because I feel as though they would have got somewhere else if they just kept off of James Harden. Like, at the end of the day, I feel as though James Harden took away from a lot of the other guys, but that's for another day. I guess we can see for him. What do you think about the Sixers end of their season and Miami taking them out? And I believe it was
Yeah, it was 6 games.
It was 6 games in that one too. So, or in that one as well. So, what do you think about for the Philadelphia Sixers and Joel Embiid, who, in my opinion, should have won MVP? Like I said, we'll get into that later. But what do you think about that for him, and what can they do next? Like, I guess they'll run it back with James. I wouldn't run it back with James, but what do you think they're looking at?
Well, I got to publicly eat some crow on our pod. I picked the Raptors to beat the Sixers in the first round in 7 games. I just didn't believe in James Harden being that reliable second option. And I thought with Toronto, with their depth and they're just having so many live defensive bodies to throw on James, I just thought that he would be neutralized throughout the entire series. And I just thought that they would find a way to win. But of course, Scotty Barnes got hurt. And then I think Fred got hurt. And then they just weren't playing the way I expected them to play. And especially going down 3-0, Joel Embiid hitting that crazy left wing 3 to send game 3 into overtime. They ended up winning, taking the 3-0 lead. I said, wow, this is one of the worst picks I've probably ever made. It's crazy. But as far as Joel, it just gets to the point where you just start to feel bad for him individually, because every year it's something. And like, as a former athlete myself, I know what it's like to always have to fight through something, never feel as though you're 100% when you want to be. So that's just deflating. The tailwind between when they first made the Harden trade and how great they were for those first 5 or 7 games compared to when the honeymoon phase ended and going into the playoffs, just how pedestrian James Harden looked. Like, that was extremely alarming for me. And I've been on record on this podcast saying I'm not the biggest Harden fan. I don't like the way he plays. I don't like the way he hunts for fouls. But just to see him get neutralized like that by the Raptors for the majority of the series, for him to squeak out of that, then for him to get neutralized by the Heat the way he were, except for the exception of, I want to say game 4 that was, where he went off for 30. Mm-hmm. Other than that, man, he was in, like, he couldn't blow by Tyler Hero.
It just looked like he can't blow by anybody anymore. And that was the biggest part of his game, was blowing by people.
Exactly, especially when you don't have a mid-range. His entire game was predicated on I'm either gonna fake you with the step back, or I'm gonna get all the way to the rim and either shoot the floater or throw the lob. And for him to not even be able to do that, I was just like, wow, I know we're gonna talk about the Lakers soon. We have a guy who I would say has the worst contract in the league, but for Harden to be due what I think is $47 million next year, and for him to opt in for that has to be that has to be one of the worst contracts in the league right now, just based off the production versus the expectations. So if you're Philly, I really don't know where you go from here. I guess you have no choice but to run it back. But yeah, I'm excited to see what they do as far as with the draft and going into the summer, especially with Doc Rivers. We're hearing that he's coming back, so going to give him another chance. So I guess we just have to give it another year and talk soon.
Best of luck with Glenn Rivers. I don't think that's going to work out for me. I wouldn't do that if I was Philly, but that's going to be on them. For Toronto, I think hearing a lot of Pascal and OG and possible moves this summer. Think for them, it's all around. I guess you want to build something around Scotty and Fred. I think. We'll see with them. I know Nick Nurse is a good coach. Apparently, Nick Nurse was supposedly on the Lakers' radar, but that, I guess, is no longer, and he's going to stay in Toronto. We know why. Sixth God had that bag for him. Like I told you, he wasn't really going anywhere. But but at the end of the day, think for Toronto, if they do end up moving Pascal, that'd be interesting. I wonder where he would go. I've seen a lot of Phoenix people want him on the Suns to pair with Booker and Chris Paul, but I I I don't know. Maybe Pascal's now that player that people look at as a person that is a added piece to a championship team. We'll see. But we'll get onto the Suns and stuff like that when we get over there. But for the Toronto Raptors, I think they'll be fine. The Eastern Conference is diminishing slightly, but not too much, but slightly. So I think they can still have a chance to be in there in contention most of the way. So what do you think for them? Do you think anything about Toronto's off season coming up or what they could possibly look into doing?
Um, I definitely did see some OG Anunoby trades. I saw some OG Anunoby trade rumors. Obviously, I'm biased. I would love him in LA. He's exactly what we need: a two-way wing that can hit shots, can put the ball on the floor, hit his free throws, and just knows how to play the game. Doesn't really need the ball too much to be effective. Type of guy you would like to put on a team like the Lakers. But as far as Pascal, that's very interesting to see where he could go. I mean, I guess I really can't think of a team off the dome that I could see him plugging in and being effective with immediately.
Does he look good on? Does he look good on our team? If you that because at that point you would at that point I'm saying if you put him on our team you got to move Jaren to the five for sure. But we'll get into Grizzlies trade talk. We'll get into
That would
some
be
of their talk.
interesting. Now that you just put that together like that, I could see that. I could see that.
So Miami ended up beating, like we said, Philly in six. So they made it to the Eastern Conference Finals, and they needed an opponent on the opposite side. So gonna go into that 3-6 matchup. Milwaukee, Chicago. Chicago was always the team that I told myself throughout the season. I said they look great now. They look like they can be good, but something just didn't move me ever. Not at one point in the season was I ever moved by the team, and they ended up proving me right. Although a lot of Chicago fans will tell you that it was injuries. They tell you that exactly me wasn't right. That they never got Lonzo Ball back after January 1st, I believe. So, um, to me, I mean, I don't know. DeMar DeRozan has once again in the playoffs come up short, not by his own doing, but once again has come up short in the playoffs. Like, where did they go to? Is it just about signing Zach this summer, making sure Zach stays, or is it about taking DeMar? Because I mean, hearing the stuff you hear about Zach apparently not wanting to be like in the role that he is in Chicago, but
Mm-hmm.
for his career has asked Chicago to help him. That doesn't really make sense. But you get your help and now you want to leave. So I don't know why you would want to leave because I would think it's more money to stay with Chicago. And two, I mean, you just build around what you guys had already had. I mean, you were in the first seed a couple times throughout the season. So I don't really understand why you would want to leave. But if he does, he does. But for me, I just think Chicago. I guess it'd just be about trying to get guys healthy, and I guess running it back, seeing what they can add in the draft and free agency coming up. But what do you think about Chicago's season and for your guy Lonzo Ball, and what he could possibly bring to them when he comes back healthy, or if he can ever stay healthy for an entire NBA season? Like that is now something that is in real question about.
Yeah. Um. Yeah, you hit it right on the nose. With Lonzo, his biggest hurdle is health. Can he stay healthy for an entire 82 and be ready for the stretch run in the playoffs? But the Zach DeMar situation is interesting because Zach did want help. That was the big thing going into last season before they signed DeMar was, is Zach going to get any help? Then you bring in Zoe and DeMar, then DeMar ends up being that main guy. So I guess Zach is left feeling like, whoa, like I asked for help, but not this much help. I still think I'm capable of being the best player on a playoff team. And I still think that's the case, but I just think with the year DeMar had, especially in the first half of the season, he was lights out. He was easily a first team All NBA nod if the season would have ended around the All-Star break for the shooting guard small forward position. But if I'm Zach, let me remove my Laker bias out of this. If I'm Zach, I think staying in Chicago is the right move because you have a squad. Patrick Williams was hurt for the majority of the year. He came back late. He wasn't who he was his rookie year this year. So he'll be back. Nikola Vucevic, I think was the biggest culprit of their
He's a
loss against
bum.
the Bucks.
He's a bum. He's
No
not that.
attention went to how ineffective he was, especially against Bobby Portis and Brooke Lopez. He was just a shell of himself in that playoff series, and I guess you got to credit Coach Bud and the Bucks defense, but you expect more from him. And I like their bench. I like Kobe White. So I think if you bring the squad back, just like Toronto, if you bring the squad back, another year of continuity, another year of development, they should be a higher seed next year because I don't expect them to go whatever it was against the top three seeds in both conferences, like 1-15, 1-17, whatever it was last year. I don't expect that to happen. I expect Lonzo to be healthy for the second half of the season. I expect Zach to be healthy for the second half of the season. I expect Vooch to be better, and I expect the bench to stay the same. So I guess I'm publicly putting stock in the Bulls for next year if they bring the squad back, but only under the condition that they indeed bring the squad back.
Yeah, and they ended up getting knocked out in 5. So, well, I mean, we'll see for them. Like I said, I think we're both on the same accord that they just need to add another offseason, maybe try to get healthy throughout the offseason, add a couple of few pieces in that mesh with the system and see where they go from there. Then you have Milwaukee moving into the second round, and they need to face an opponent. And here we go with our 2-7 matchup. The Brooklyn Nets winning their playing game versus the Cleveland Cavaliers to make it 2-7 to officially lock into the playoffs. So Kyrie Irving, and at this point of the season, the New York mayor had lifted the mandate. So now Kyrie Irving was now available in home games, and it looked up for the Brooklyn Nets going in, but they had to go against the team to beat since January 1st, the Boston Celtics, the 2 seed who did not duck that chance to become the 2 seed and got swept. Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, and the Brooklyn Nets got swept. And in my honest opinion, it was the right thing to happen, and it was the most necessary thing to happen. And this is why I say this. The Boston Celtics had been the best defensive team in the entire throughout most of the season. Throughout most of the season, but especially since January 1st. So at the end of the day, when you're looking at the whole aspect of it, you have KD and Kyrie, who they have players that can match up against them, defending them, and if nobody else is going to help KD and Kyrie, we watched Nick Claxton shoot like 25% from the free throw line. We saw nobody except for maybe Seth Curry or Patty Mills in a couple of games hit outside perimeter threes. It was a struggle to score if it wasn't Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. And Boston simply stayed down and stayed tight. The first game was the closest game, and they still pulled it out because of the heroics of Jason Tatum. At the end of the day, that's heroic plays. Heroic plays win you games. At the end of the day, nothing about percentages matter or how close the games are in the playoffs, as long as they happen and they matter. And ever since game 1, it wasn't close throughout the rest of the series. They were tight games, of course, because you have 2 superstars on the other side, but it wasn't close throughout the rest of the series. So for me, the Brooklyn Nets, you need a lot to do in this offseason. There's a lot of questions going around this offseason on, one, if you can trust Kyrie Irving to be on your team that long. And I know you're a Kyrie fan, but these are real questions that you have to ask about this player. Like, you have to trust where his mental state will be at throughout the season. You have to trust too much things that aren't involved with basketball with Kyrie Irving. That makes it seem like you almost don't even really want Kyrie Irving on the team. So I ask you this. My decision would be to trade Kyrie Irving because it just makes no sense to have him around Kevin Durant. Let Kevin Durant work himself around a team full of other guys. If you have a bunch of, if you let, in my opinion, if you let Kevin Durant work as though he's like not on the ball player like Luka Doncic, but having guys around Luka Doncic and just say, Kevin Durant, you are our leader. You go work. Everybody else works for you. Make it that easy instead of having Kevin Durant want to defer to other guys and make other guys happy and just do your thing because you are an unstoppable scorer. But you didn't see that in that series versus Boston. You saw him struggle a lot from the field, which is something that you can't really expect from Kevin Durant. So at the end of the day, my opinion would be to trade Kyrie Irving. What do you think for the Nets? I just think that's just not a good matchup because of the off the court things. Too much things that involve himself, and he's at home. So there's so many other factors that are involved in his game that aren't on the court. So what do you think for them going on to this offseason and after getting swept to the Boston Celtics?
Well, I think it's clear that the Nets general management agree with you because all reports are telling us that they're kind of reluctant to give him a new max deal, a new long term extension. So they agree with your sentiments that this guy is can't trust him. He's unreliable. It's always something with him. One day he's sitting out for personal reasons. The next day it's illegal for him to play in our gym. So I don't know, man, but I just know one thing. There are not a lot of guys that can impact the game like Kyrie Irving. And I know I may be in love with the aesthetic of him playing, his incredible handles and his incredible shot making ability, but and I sound like a broken record, when him and Kevin Durant are healthy on the court, as scarce as it may be, they are two of the most electric players in the entire world. And them getting swept, I didn't call it. I don't think anyone called Boston in four. I had Boston winning the series in 6 games, but I definitely did not predict a sweep. But do you trade Kyrie Irving? I think this year is the last chance to I think this is the last year you have to give him a chance to prove that he can be the reliable guy that you need him to be. And then if he can't show you that, if he hasn't played at least 80% of the games by next trade deadline, you have to at least consider it. You have to put it on the table and just throw the idea out there, bounce it around the heads of whoever else is in that meeting room. I guess Steve Nash and Nets ownership,
Mhm.
because it's been like this since he's gotten to Brooklyn, which is crazy because every year it's something else. The first year was his most healthiest, and that was the year Katie had to sit out the entire year with the Achilles. So I'm not quite sure if you're the Nets management what you do with Kyrie Irving. But it'll be so hard to get equal compensation for a guy of his talent level. I mean, because other teams probably feel the same way the Nets feel. I don't want to trade for an unreliable asset, so I'm not going to give you my best assets. So it's like his trade value, despite him being healthy and extremely talented, his trade value may not be where Brooklyn's management may need it to be in order to pull the trigger and get a guy that can at least be equal to or more value to Kyrie that Kyrie was. So I'm just not. I wouldn't trade him. I wouldn't trade him just because he's so damn good. And there's only a few guys, probably two handfuls of guys that can produce the way he can, especially next to Katie. And him and Katie have such a great rapport from the outside looking in. It seems like that. So I don't know what you do. It's so tough. But the bigger question, I think, along with Kyrie Irving, is I think they traded for another unreliable asset in Ben Simmons. I know there was a lot of talk about was Ben Simmons ever going to suit up. There was a rumor that he was going to suit up for game 4. That ended up not happening. He ended up getting surgery a few weeks after their season ended. So, and I am a Laker fan, so I guess it's not in my best interest to root for Brooklyn. But I think if you bring that squad back fully healthy, they can be a player in the East. They can be a title contender with Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant, Ben Simmons, and the crew. Nick Claxton has to work on his free throws, but that's probably the case with all rim runners in the league. They probably need some wing defenders. Bruce Brown was out there fighting for his life against the Celtics. Seth Curry showed up when he had to, but he's still Seth at the end of the day. He's never going to be that 25 point per game scorer that they were relying on him to be once they realized Kyrie and Katie weren't producing the way that they were supposed to. So I think you bring the squad back. My biggest concern with Brooklyn is Steve Nash. He just is not ready to be a head coach of a team with this high of expectations just yet. They had Ime Udoka on the staff. He went to Boston, of course. He's leading them. So I think you have to make a coaching change before you make a personnel change with the Brooklyn Nets. And if everyone's healthy next year, I'm sure the odds makers would agree with me when I say they are a player to win the championship next season.
You had the Boston Celtics ended up defeating, like you said, or like we said, the Brooklyn Nets in 4, sweeping them, and they moved on to place the Milwaukee Bucks in the semifinals. And Boston ends up pulling that out in 7 games. Giannis came to play. Giannis came to play, came to fight. We have, of course, no Chris Middleton to help out Giannis in the second round, but Drew Holiday was still there. For
It
the
was amazing.
Bucks, yeah, for the Bucks, I mean, Giannis, he was great. He did something that no player had ever done in a series before. It's not much more you can ask. You can only just ask that sometimes health wins out at the end of the day. And Boston was the more healthier team. They had the more impressed. The Bucks had multiple times chances to win games, and they failed multiple times. I want to say it was game 4. Was it game? Which there was a game. Was it? I don't know if it's game 3 or game 4 with the tip in that. No, not the tip in.
Oh
The,
yeah,
it
yeah,
was game 4, right?
yeah, that was game 4. That was
I
game
think it was
4.
game 4. Game 4 and game 6 were Milwaukee's to win. Those games were Milwaukee's to win, and they failed both of those games. So at the end of the day, you have to look at the series and say we wouldn't allow Jason Tatum to go crazy in game 6, and even though he went crazy, we still had a chance to win. We just faltered at the end, and in game 4, same thing, just faltered at the end. You have to look at it as and say we just have to run it back. I mean, at the end of the day, there's not much more that we can
Yeah, of
even
course.
say. Yeah, of course. Like there's not much more that we can even say for this team. That you just have to add pieces around Giannis and let Giannis be great. I thought he played, like I said, I thought he played a great series, great playoffs in general. Still proving to me. I mean, I think that he's the best player in the world. If the jumper is falling now, that's something that you have to consider now. So he can only get better. I mean, he's still 26, 27 years old. He's getting into his prime, so he's only going to get better. The Bucks are only going to be there for a continuous time. Just hoping that and health at the end of the day wins out for them. What do you think about their series with the Celtics? I thought they fought hard, but at the end of the day, I thought the better team and deeper team won that series. So what do you think for the Bucks going into the offseason and about Giannis's play in this postseason, how great he was?
Yeah, like you just said, the Bucks are great going into this offseason. They really don't need to change much. Like you said, they just got to get their second star and Chris Middleton back. But real quick, if Chris Middleton plays, you think they win that series against Boston?
I mean, you would have to maybe say yes. You would maybe have to say yes, just because. And at the end of the day, he could have shot them out of games. Like somebody else could have been getting shots that he would have made. But
Mhm.
with the inconsistency of Drew Holiday, if another guy would have just maybe been there sometimes, like maybe even game 4 and game 6,
Right.
maybe we're talking about the Bucks moving on instead of the Celtics. So possibly.
Right. If Boston would have ended up losing that series, it would have been because of how they lost Game 5 against the Bucks. That man, that as a guy who roots for even though I am a Lakers fan for the 10th time this episode, I root for the Celtics when my team is at home because Jason Tatum is my favorite player. So, and he's been my favorite player for a few years now. So, when I watch the Celtics, I know the dynamic of their team. I know what their pecking order should be. And for Marcus Smart to close game 5 the way he did, I felt as though if they were to go on and lose that series to the Bucks, and I think I texted you that you got to move on from Marcus Smart. After game 5, I was so upset with his inability to close the game and Drew Holiday just picking his pocket like that, blocking the shot on one end, stealing the ball from him on the other. Like that was just a terrible way to close the game. And I felt as though if they lost that series, it would have been because of that game. But yeah, as far as the Bucks, they're great. They're great. Still got Giannis, still got Chris, still got Drew, still got Lopez, still got Bobby Portis. That's shown that can be the nucleus. Still got Grayson Allen, of course. Can't forget about my Dookie. It's shown that can be the nucleus to a championship team, and they proved that against Boston. They just didn't have I guess you can say, their closer late in games when it's time to hit a jump shot. So
Mm-hmm.
they're good. They're fine. So that'll be fine.
So you had Boston moving on to the Eastern Conference Finals to match up against Miami, who met it on the top side of the bracket, and it was a good. I don't know. It's hard for me to say it was a good series. I think both. I think until game, and when I say that, I'm meaning to say I don't think the games really were like in sway until about 5
Mhm.
because it was like blowout, blowout,
Oh, right,
blowout,
right, right,
blowout.
right. Totally.
Then 5, 6, 7 was really the games that came alive. So I think it was a good series, but not like in terms of the first 4 games. I'd probably say 5 through 7 were the best games. And game 6, I think I had a good grasp on the series the entire time. Just especially from game 5, I basically had money on Boston. Well, I had money on Boston this entire playoff run going on to win the Eastern Conference that I took at them, and appreciate that. and then so we had the biggest test for them. I thought was Brooklyn. Then you had the Bucks, who is a big test, but without Middleton, you should be able to get past that. But then Miami, they came out and it was the game. I think it was game 3 when Bam Adebayo had his game. And I said to myself, I said, I I don't know if Boston can win the series. I don't think because like they just played so poorly in that game. It shifted
Mhm.
me so much to think like
Mhm.
that it was done for them. But then, of course, you had the guys refocusing in and locking in, and you actually ended up having a good 5 games, 5, 6, and 7 that led to a sway back and forth. You had Boston winning 5. You had Miami coming in on their deathbed, almost the first time in the playoffs, coming in Game 6 and handling business. Jimmy Butler going off for, I think he had 40 plus that game. He had
Yeah,
47, I want to
47,
say. Yeah,
47.
he had 47, and then you come to Game 7 where a massive, massive, massive ebbs and flows game. You had teams taking a lead, Miami coming back, Boston taking a lead, Miami coming back, Boston taking the lead again, Miami coming back, Boston taking the lead. What I thought was for good at 13 with about 3 minutes left, and you had Miami coming back again, and then you had the shot. I guess we could talk about the shot. I thought when your season's on the line, you've already played all the minutes in the game. Your teammates know you're going to take the shot. The opponent knows you're going to take the shot. Well, I won't say take the shot, but the opponent knows you have the ball in your hand. Your teammates will know that you will have the ball in your hand. I see nothing wrong with Jimmy Butler's shot attempt to win the game, to not play any more minutes because his legs are already burnt to toast. A lot of people are saying, why don't you just go for the lane? Why don't you go for the lane? Well, if a lot of people don't notice, or at least a lot of people weren't necessarily saying that when he scored bucket 33 and bucket 35, those are both, in my opinion, and one layups that weren't called.
Mhm.
So I'm talking in his head. He's thinking they're not going to call a foul. We're down 2. I don't feel like playing overtime. Let me go for the win. And it was long. It was online, just dead because he had just short because he had dead legs. So at the end of the day, I don't see a problem with the shot. Big players go for big shots in big games. That's what he is. He's been that for his entire career. He was that in this series. I see no problem with the shot. What do you think about the shot? And overall, Boston taking the series in Game 7 with the great performance from both Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum in Game 7, and Marcus Smart too. Except
Yeah,
he missed a
Marcus
lot
Smart.
of shots at the end to almost make the game close. But Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum at Game 7.
Yeah, like you said, I love that Jimmy Butler shot. That's my type of shot by my type of players. Um, the only thing that I could say is that sometimes in late game situations, your brain and your body aren't on the same page. Your brain may be telling your body just to take the easy way out, settle for the 3, and that's when you have to put mind over matter and say, no, I know I'm dead, but I'm going to attack the basket and at the very worst get a foul. So I see both sides of that. And for the season, and I was talking to some Heat fans since Game 7, and their stance, which I guess I can't disagree with, is that we all know Jimmy Butler is not the greatest shooter. So even though he was wide open, even though he hit a shot in the third quarter that was identical to the shot that he took at the end of the game, for Jimmy, that still may not be a good shot. So I guess I give credence to that claim that that's not a good shot because it's not a good shooter shooting it. But I love the shot. The guy had 50 for you the game before, had 40 for you that game. Wasn't for him, you guys probably would have got bounced. Probably in 6, you guys probably would have lost that. Of course, you guys probably would have lost that game in Game 6. If it wasn't for him having one of the greatest playoff games we've ever seen. So I like that shot. It just didn't go in. So then I thought, as I was watching the game live, as the game was waning down, I thought to myself, well, who can make that shot? Coming down to you just played 48 minutes the night before, you're already at 47 minutes and counting this game. Who can hit that shot? And then when you think about the short list of players that can hit it, KD, Steph's, I guess you could throw Tatum in there now. I guess
LeBron.
LeBron.
There's a. I wouldn't say Tatum commit like that. That's like you talking about 48 minutes and the game on the line. At that point,
That's a huge shot. That's a huge
I'm only
shot.
putting like pantheon type guys up there. Of course,
Right.
like the clutch players, but like pantheon type guys because that's like a historic feat to be running out like that. So
Kawhi Leonard, like go
yeah,
guys of that caliber. So when I thought about the short list of guys that can make that shot, I said, all right, okay, maybe Jimmy probably should have went for the 2, maybe should have tried to get a layup, get a better shot. But then you see the play. Al Horford has been playing out of his mind this entire playoffs. You gotta we could probably dedicate an entire episode to how Al has decided to turn back the clock 7 years and play this great so far for the Celtics. So it's not a guarantee, and this is the pushback I was giving Heat fans. It's not a guarantee that he just lays Al Horford up that easy and ties the game. That shot in that moment was what you like to was what you like. If you're a Heat fan, you like to see that shot go up because it's wide open. It's not a broken play, but he's coming down. He has numbers. You don't want to stop his momentum and call a timeout because you call timeouts and draw up plays to get shots that are wide open like that. So like Rachel Nichols used to always say on the jump, it's a make or miss league. And he missed the shot, but I still love the shot. And I think that's a shot for him that goes in wide open like that, coming down, you get a chance to walk into it. I think that's a shot that goes in at least 5.5 to 6 times out of 10 for Jimmy Butler. Just didn't go in, and sometimes that's the name of the game.
I think that he have a lot of questions because coming into the offseason just to figure out what type of team they like. I don't know. I just felt as though that they were somewhat of an overachieving one seed through the season. I felt like they are a seed high that and maybe another team that we'll talk about is in the same type of pathway, but they are a team that gets into that high contention because they just have players that go out there and play pretty hard every night.
Yeah.
And it's gonna result in wins because you got undrafted players, back end drafted players. Like I don't know how sustainable that will be in long term success. I think Jimmy Butler is a primetime player. You have him for the playoff runs. But you need guys that can settle you in for the 82, and maybe that's just Heat culture that they'll just be sustainable for the 82. But you're going to need players that can come in for the 16. And you kind of saw Tyler Hero and Bam Adebayo. Bam kind of get there, kind of show that he can matter in games. I mean, Game 7 he played well. He mattered enough. But you got players like Tyler Hero who's saying that he wants to be a starter next year, and your coach doesn't trust you to do that. If your coach doesn't trust you to start, I feel as though there's something with that. Like there's something with that along the lines of that. So he was hurt.
You think it's real quick? You think it's trust, or do you think it's just like
his quote saying, "I think I should start next year. I think I've earned that." That sounds something like Spoelstra doesn't think that he's earned that. So that to me, I don't know that how doesn't that equalize trust? Like how doesn't that equalize somebody saying, "You've earned that spot. I've seen enough. You've earned it. There you go." Like the kid was already in his third year.
Mm-hmm.
His first year, he played excellent. His bubble run, he played excellent. So right. I don't know. I just think that that's a player that you got to figure out if you're going to keep him or you're going to move him because he's a talent, but maybe he needs to be a talent on a team where he can be his own talent. Like he'll never be above Jimmy Butler. He'll never be likely above Bam Adebayo at that point either. And you could kind of see in the playoff runs, he wouldn't be over a guy like Kyle Lowry just because Kyle Lowry can go out there and hold his own, at least on the defensive end. And you saw players on both, even in Miami, even in the Philly series, he was attacked in the Philly series. Mm-hmm. He was tried to be attacked in the Atlanta series, but it didn't matter at that point.
Yeah, it didn't matter.
And he was even though he didn't get it, I don't think he got a chance to play in the Celtics series except for Game 7.
Yeah,
he would have been attacked in that series as well.
Yeah, of course.
So at the end of the day, he gives you good offensive production. He's a good player. I just think you have to figure you're trying to figure out what you're going to do with him because if he's not going to be a starter, if he's just going to be a bench player, you can't pay him that money, which is what he's going to want. He's going to want big time money. And if he's just going to be a bench player, you can't do that. So I think for him, there's a lot of questions you got to ask. And for Miami in general, like, what are they going to do with Oladipo? Are they going to keep them? Just a lot of things that they had to figure out throughout the offseason. So it all comes down to tonight. Actually, the day that we're recording this will be Game 1 of the 2022 NBA Finals. Long NBA season back to the regular NBA season of 82 games. It all comes down to this one. You have Boston Celtics who through a tight-knit run since January 1st have now made it to the NBA Finals, going up against the classic, the old guys, still getting it done, and the Golden State Warriors, making their now 7 final. What?
Yeah, six finals.
Six finals in 8 years or 1 year, something like that. What do you think will happen in this series? How can you see who do you see will be a winner? I think for me, before we get to you real quick, I think for me, Boston, they will be in a lot of the games, but sometimes just that slight lack of focus or that slight inexperience gap will cost them a game or two, and you'll find themselves in another situation, kind of like ours with the Memphis Grizzlies, I should say, down 4-2 in a series, but that you feel like you should have won maybe in 5 or 6. So for me, I have the Warriors 4-2 winning the series in 6 games versus pulling out games 1, 4, 5, and 6. Um, I want Boston to win very badly. I think let's just put that precipice out there now. I actually have money on Boston 4-3 winning in 7, but I have more money on the Warriors winning in 6, 4-2. So, what do you think for this series coming along, and who do you actually have winning this series, pulling it out in the end?
I'm not gonna lie, um, my brother Corey, I do not have a pick yet. I've spent every moment that I've been awake since the Celtics knocked off the Heat and we knew what the matchup was going to be, debating internally on who I have winning. And as we're getting closer and closer to tip off to game one, I got the Boston Celtics in 7 games, and here's why.
Mm.
I'm just going with what I trust more, and what I trust more in a team, and that size, and that's being able to play defense around all 5 players on the court. The Boston Celtics, you hit it right on the nose. Last 5 minutes of every game, when the score is within 5 points or less, they kill me. They they make me they make they make me upset that I picked them going into the game with how they play to close games. But I just think that defensively, they are going to give the Warriors everything they can handle, especially if one out of Steph, Clay, or Poole aren't playing the way Steph, Clay, and Poole are accustomed to playing. And I don't think they're going to play that well because of the perimeter defenders Boston has. I think Steph Curry will show up to play, but I think the most important matchup of this entire series will be Jaylen Brown versus Clay Thompson, the second best players for each squad, respectively. Because it's safe to say that I think Steve Kerr is going to assign Wiggins to Jason for the entire series, same way he assigned Wiggins to Luka last series. And I think Jason is gonna, and I think they're gonna battle, but I think Jason will eventually, rise to that matchup and outplay Wiggins. But if Jaylen Brown can outplay Clay Thompson, then it just puts the Warriors in such a tough spot, because if he's making him work offensively and then giving it to him defensively, then you're just depending way too much on Steph Curry to pull the rabbit out of his hat way too many times in this series, that I think Steph Curry will answer the call, and I think he'll be an amazing player this series, but I just don't think his help will be where it needs to be once the series goes back to Boston and once we start getting to the second half of the games this series. I just think defense and size will prevail, and I think one of the most important keys for the Warriors are, outside of the Clay and Jalen matchup, Draymond Green has to be a scorer. He has to score the ball. He can't he can't be the Draymond that we saw in the Nuggets series, or in the Memphis, or in the series against y'all, or in the Dallas series, where he's okay with playing 38 minutes and leaving with 7 points. You can't do that against Boston. These guys have players that can give you 12 to 18 points, maybe 20 points in Al Horford and Grant Williams' case every night. So you have to, offensively, you have to be a threat to score the ball, Draymond. And I think the third most important player for the Golden State Warriors is Kevon Looney, because he played great against Dallas. What he had, I think he had an 18-point, 22 rebound game in their closeout game 5 victory. He had another crazy double-double in game 4. He has to be he has to be ready to bang with both Robert and Al, is if assuming Robert Williams is going to continue to play through pain, which he's been doing since he came back during the Milwaukee series. I just Kevon Looney and Draymond Green have to do things that I'm not accustomed to seeing them do, which is score the ball in Draymond's case, and in Kavon's case, keep up what he did last series, which most would call an anomaly. So I don't know. I love Steph Curry, as you know, he's my second favorite player in the league, but Jason Tatum is my favorite player in the NBA, and I think with the defenders that they have, the way Marcus Smart is just going to be so annoying to Steph Curry for probably 7 games. The way Jalen is just going to be, the way Jalen is just going to just go at Clay and then try his best to defend him. And then the way Jason in big moments are just going to be able to be that off the dribble shot maker, along with Al Horford pouring it in, Grant Williams pouring it in, Robert Williams, Peyton Pritchard. I think they got it. I think this will be, and I'm still like, as I'm saying this out loud, I'm still questioning my pick because it's like these are two super evenly matched teams, but I just think defense and size prevails, and I think coaching may prevail. I think Ime Udoka has the guys so focused, especially defensively. I just think that Game 7 in Golden State will be
That'll be the second time they lose a game seven in their own crib. I don't.
in the finals. It would be. I think the Celtics will win Game 7 in the Chase Center to win the NBA Finals because I just don't see how the Warriors are going to consistently get baskets on the Celtics defense, especially if Draymond is reluctant and refuses to score the ball. I just don't see how they're going to be able to score with Jason and Jalen and Marcus and Al and Rob and Grant and Peyton giving you his few 11 to 12 points off the bench. Derek White coming in and giving you what he can give you. It'll be tough. It'll be tough. I know the talk on a lot of sports shows today is this the Warriors' biggest test they've seen in the finals? And it's by far the biggest test they're going to see this season in the playoffs outside of y'all. I thought y'all were going to give them the best bump that they got. I had Phoenix playing them, but I think I had y'all giving them a better run for their money than Phoenix would have if they would have beat Dallas. So I don't know, man. Like I said, I think defense and size prevails. And unless Kevon Looney can be a defensive anchor in the paint, I don't see how the paint is not wide open for the Boston Celtics. I just don't see any resistance that they have getting to the basket. So going with the Celtics in 7 games, I think Steph Curry plays like a Hall of Famer, but I think the inability of his teammates to score in high leverage moments will be their demise. And I think the Celtics just play team ball for 7 games, and I think they get a dub. I think the home team wins every game until Game 7.
Well, if you were to put your money where your mouth is, I mean, that'll be plus 130 odds for the Celtics to win the championship. So I mean, you definitely be coming up a nice little amount if you bet on them. I just think I agree with all the points that you're saying. It just feels as though some magical voodoo will come down upon the Warriors, and this series would just make it seem like they defend some of the guys on the Celtics. Draymond Green's inability of scoring won't hurt them ever. Seems to really ever get to them. So I just think the greatness of players like Steph Curry and Klay Thompson in this moment, I feel as though the Celtics got over that hump. They got over the hump that they needed to go over the 3 times of going to the ECF and losing. I think they finally got over what they needed to get over. Now this is just a different. And if they don't make this moment bigger than what it actually is, you'll see good playoff games for sure. But I just think that experience will just chop it down for them. And at the end of the day, I do believe that this is the best test in the playoffs. Like you said, so I'm interested to see. But I think for my own sake, Warriors in 6 is the safest and smartest. Just 2 games, at least one at home, maybe one on the road if they fight hard enough. But then just the Warriors now the one thing that actually is something that actually has to be considered about this series is the travel is actually probably one of the biggest travel discrepancies in playoff games since probably Lakers versus Boston. I would think.
Yeah, I was about to say, yeah,
I
maybe
think
us in Boston.
since that 2010 series, this travel is actually quite literally like peak to peak of the USA, like
No, for real.
USA to the other peak of the USA. So that's going to be a thing. I mean, it doesn't really seem. It seems to work. That seems to affect more in NFL games and NBA games, but
Mm-hmm.
still, that's something that we're going to have to notice. So this NBA Finals, we have our predictions set. Corey has Warriors in 6. Lil has undecided slash Celtics in 7. I'll give him that. I'll give him his
Season
due.
7, we can lock it in. Season 7, season 7. Jason Tatum, Finals MVP. Um, but it won't be because of Steph Curry. It will not be because of Steph Curry. It will be because Jaylen Brown outplayed Klay Thompson, and they're just going to continue to hunt Jordan Poole. Like Jordan Poole, I was reading this article today. When the Celtics play their defensive lineup, is he going to be unplayable? Like, is he going to be unplayable in high leverage moments in games this series?
I thought he was going to be unplayable versus us. I didn't think that they would be able to put out Steph, Clay, and Jordan Poole against us because we would be able to match up to them with one size but ability to match up. But when it comes to the Celtics, I see it going probably Jason on Wiggins, Smart
Mm-hmm.
on Curry, Jalen on Thompson.
And if you're
Uh,
the Celtics, you love that.
yeah, Grant. Depending on just that Grant Williams, Al Horford, Daniel Tice, Robert Williams, 4-man rotation in the front court. We'll see how it works out for him. I don't mind a pick of Celtics. I'm seeing Boston in 6 trending. Doesn't usually work out good for anybody ever, but um, I mean I'm excited. So I have stuff like I said, I have Warriors in 6. You have Celtics in 7. And real quick, let's talk about your Lakers before we head up out of here. Darvin, as you shake your head,
Thought we could avoid my guys, but fuck it, we're here.
Darvin Ham, new coach. What do you think this leads to? You have still questions on the offseason, of course, but Darvin Ham is now a new coach. You have now shipped off Vogel. So, what do you think this could lead to for the Lakers and going forward into next season, which is, in my opinion, a make or break season for a lot of players on the team, including Anthony Davis of
Oh,
that nature.
especially Anthony Davis. If he can't play, if he can't play at least what's his number of games that he has to play this year in order to come back in 2023? In my opinion, it's 60. But my
60. I was
friends,
gonna say I was gonna say 60 to 63,
but
somewhere
in
around
my
there.
but people in my circle have been telling me that that's too high of a number. Perennially, he'll never be able to play 60. That's a too high of an expectation to expect him to play 60 to 65 games. But with his injury history, especially these last 2 years, if he misses majority of the season for a third straight year, you have to consider moving him. But back to the original topic, I think us hiring Darvin Ham was a rare W from our front office. Rob Palinka, Jeannie Buss, thank you. I want to give you a round of applause live on my podcast for hiring Darvin Ham, who I think will be great as far as being able to relate to the guys in the locker room. People were saying Vogel couldn't really reach the team as much as he would like. I think he'll be able to hold the guys accountable, specifically Russell Westbrook and Anthony Davis, when Westbrook is playing like Westbrook, like Westbrick, I mistakenly say Westbrook. He'll bring him in and tell him, hold him accountable and say, bro, you're losing us the game. AD's reluctancy to play the 5, I think that's out of the window now. I think if Darvin Ham wants you to play the 5, he's going to make Anthony Davis play the 5. LeBron James, a guy who you have to have your reservations as far as holding accountable because he is indeed so great, has such a high basketball IQ. But there are some times that I felt as though this season, his shot selection, along with his effort off the ball and defensively, were just showing that he knew that this team wasn't going to go anywhere. So I think once he's more locked in for next season, his effort will show. But when it's not, and when he's playing with low effort, I need Darvin Ham to hold LeBron James accountable because that will show the rest of the roster that if this guy can be held accountable, then you other guys, we know for a fact you can be held accountable. So I think that's Darvin Ham. I think that's number one. I think that's the number one point of emphasis on Darvin Ham's job description is to hold the guys accountable, make AD accepting for playing the 5, make Westbrook less turnover prone. If that means put him on a bench to just shorten his sample size of time in the game, then so be it. I was one of the first people last year I know that wanted Westbrook to go to the bench. I think it was after our very first game against Golden State. I knew this shit was not going to work. I'm going off on a tangent, but I like Darvin Ham. According to our reports, we're letting him pick his own staff, which is something that we didn't allow Frank Vogel to do. Also, according to reports, Kurt Rambis will not be in the meeting room um, when we have our weekly